Hello and welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. My co-host Justin Baker joining me in studio today on this wonderful Saturday. Would you say morning, mid-morning brunch?
Brunch here, yeah. Brunch. I love brunch.
It's about 11 o'clock. So, we're going to bring a great show to you as we near trade deadline. We really want to sink our teeth into all the players that may be available, at least the ones we think will be available. You never know. There has been players who you thought would never get dealt, and away they go at the deadline. They're gone. But we think we're starting to see, especially in the Eastern Conference, a picture starting to form of the teams that are in playoff contention and the teams that are not. And that gap seems to be widening by the day. And so I think that in the Eastern Conference, it's a little bit easier to target those teams, whereas in the West, even a team like the Oilers, who are third last in the conference, are still vying, and they're pushing for a playoff spot. So maybe some teams that we're not quite sure if they're buyers or sellers, but mainly in this, we're going to focus on the players. And before we dive into some speculation, why don't we break down the most recent trade that happened? Was it yesterday that this happened?
It was yesterday.
Yeah. Why don't you
right around noon?
Let's your first thought on Pittsburgh's trade with the Florida Panthers, where Bjugstad and Jared McCann head to Pittsburgh, and then Riley Sheehan and Derek Brassard, along with a second-round pick and 2 fourth-round picks, one of those belonging to the Minnesota Wild. What were your first thoughts when you saw this trade?
They finally got a third line center that actually likes to play a little rough, a little hard nosed in the corners behind the goal line, which is what they wanted. They want a guy who can win draws and likes to play that grind out game. And they got it in Bjugstad. He's a big body guy, and he's not afraid to do the dirty work, which is what they want, because they got enough finesse guys on those top 6 lines. I think Brassard never really fit that mold of what they wanted out of a third-line center, and they got it now in Bjugstad.
Yeah, my one concern is Bjugstad a center?
Right.
Because Bjugstad's played quite a bit on the wing in Florida. I think he really is a true, you can put him on the wing, he can also play center. I don't think that he's a center who can also play the wing. I think he's the other way around. And so that may be the tricky part. But I do think that he's good enough to where he can slot in there. And you also have Jared McCann, who is a nice center as well, and really has some upside to him. And so the trade, though, you immediately went onto Twitter. You attacked it, and you said, Brassard, I don't think that Brassard will stay in Florida. And then it was funny because I think it was, I don't know, Dreger or McKenzie, one of those two guys, actually tweeted after you did and said, don't be surprised if Brassard is flipped for something else. And so kudos to that. You knew before the big boys did.
Yeah, there it is. Okay.
But why do you think that Brassard will be dealt as opposed to maybe try to sign him to an extension?
Well, my biggest thought after seeing that was he's going to go into Florida being a third-line center because, they've got Barkov and Trocheck, and those two guys aren't going anywhere because, well, let's face it, they're fantastic. They put up the points. They do their work, and as long as they're healthy, they're a fantastic 1 and 2 center to have. So Brassard's not jumping either one of those two guys in the depth chart. So why would he want to hang around in Florida and be a third line center? And I think he obviously probably wouldn't re-sign. And I don't think Florida wants to re-sign him because I've already heard rumblings about 2 of the guys we'll talk about here in the Rumorville coming up. But so I honestly think that Florida's going to want to try to hit a quick reset button by getting some either, depth talent or maybe, some prospects, picks back.
Some mid-level prospects.
Yeah.
They could get a second-round pick and something else for Brassard.
Now, Sheahan, fantastic. I think he'd be a great fourth-line center for them. I think he'd work out quite well. And he's played some wing, too, in his time, so he can always go anywhere.
I mean, those bottom 6 guys are relatively interchangeable, especially guys that you would deem a fourth-line guy.
Right.
He's not really too important, I don't think, in the future of the Florida Panthers. But, Derek Brassard, I think he'll be flipped. It sounds like the Florida Panthers GM Dale Talon coming out saying we've now freed up a lot of cap space for the offseason. And so that That is interesting. And so why don't we go into our first player? We're just going to go right for the big guns.
The jugular.
Let's talk Artemi Panarin, because we know Artemi Panarin wants to be on the ocean. He said that.
Yes.
And so the Florida Panthers, ding, 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 Miami. I can't think of too many teams in the National Hockey League that offer a better beach scene than the Florida Panthers. And however, of course, we're also told New York, Montreal. There's other teams that are vying for his interests. Whether or not he gets traded at the deadline is a whole nother thing. To me, it doesn't seem like the Panthers they're not gonna try and trade for Panarin here. I think that they're probably maybe playing the long game, hoping that Columbus hangs on to him here for the playoffs.
Yeah, that's their rental.
And then he's able to go sign somewhere, and they, offer him $13 million a year. And
13, good God!
You think that he's going to go for less than the top? Like he's going to go for the big, like John Tavares type of money without the discount?
No, I think John Tavares type money is totally reasonable. But I think too, if Florida is a real contender here to sign him in the offseason, they've also got that whole no state tax thing going on.
That's true.
So
that's true. They might be able to figure out a way to
so you can wiggle a little,
and maybe pay him 11 where of course,
right.
That is a good point.
To interrupt, sorry, but how many other teams do you know where you get to play with a Barkov or Trocheck, right? There's not a lot of teams that have the cap space and two top-tier centers to play with.
That is the advantage of being a winger in free agency, is that you can go and you can look and say, all right, who's my center going to be? Mm-hmm. Whereas when you're a center, I think teams are thinking, oh, we want this guy to, like, if we want to put him with a couple players who would maybe not normally be top line guys, we expect him to turn those guys into them.
Right.
And so I think with Artemi Panarin, he really is in a unique position, and I think he will consider who the centers are. It's why I don't see him going to New York and playing with the Rangers or the Islanders, because I don't see the center depth. Same with Montreal. I look and I go, why would you want to go to Montreal and play with? I mean, Kotkaniemi looks like he'll be fine, but when you have these other options to go and play with some crazy high-end centers, and you can be this incredible 1-2 punch on the same line. I mean, we've seen it in Colorado. We've seen it in multiple teams where you have this great top line. I mean, Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn, Alex Radulov, like, it works putting three really high-end players together, and it can almost carry an entire team. So maybe he's looking and he says, I want to go play with the best center that I can play with in a beach city.
Yeah, that would be nice. I do think, though, I am still leaning towards him getting dealt at the deadline, because I do think Panarin ultimately, he's already come out and said that we're not discussing contracts till after the season, right? So I think if you're Columbus, you have to really tread lightly if you honestly believe you have a shot, because let's face it, they took Washington to Game 3 overtime to almost get up 3-0 in that first round matchup last year. So if you're Columbus, you have to be honest with yourself and say, hey, do we think we have a legit shot at the cup? Because honestly, when I look at other teams in that conference, ideally Tampa Bay and Toronto, I think they probably don't have the scoring depth to keep up with those teams. But can your goaltending and defense keep you in those games?
The fact that they've lost 4 in a row, they're 3 points away from being out of the playoffs.
Yeah, that's even scarier.
I mean, this just doesn't look like a team that is... I think this team's a mess. I think that this team all year has been operating on this. Is our two best players about to leave?
Right.
And that's a difficult place to be, especially when those two players aren't really doing much to help.
Right.
At least from the outside, that's how it appears. There's some guys, like for the Islanders last year, I know it was a distraction, but you got this feeling that Tavares tried to, like, I don't want you to think that I'm leaving kind of thing. And I don't think that he wanted to stay and was ultimately convinced to leave. Whereas Panarin wants to leave
Right.
Bobrovsky, I think, is on the fence. I think there's a chance that we'll move on. We'll talk about Bobrovsky too. We'll just lump them together. I think that there's a chance that Bobrovsky stays. I mean, he's been there his whole career outside of a couple years in Philadelphia, and so to me, it's a good situation for him. But if you were going to stay, why not just sign that extension when you could? If frankly his value was higher when he could have signed that extension. So, that's the other, that's a whole nother topic is, you're coming up for an extension. You could become an unrestricted free agent. Do you bet on yourself and play that whole next year and hope you hit a home run? Or do you go, I'm taking the safe money. I'm signing this deal and we can deal, that's fine if I get a little less money and I dominate and I maybe could have gotten an extra million, whatever. But what happens if teams go, you're aging? I mean, he's not getting a Carey Price contract now. He might have gotten one last year.
Yeah, Columbus
close to
probably
it,
could have
like a $10 million kind of deal. But I don't think you're paying him $10 million now. I think you're probably paying him $8 million.
Yeah, if that. Yeah, for sure. Because let's face it, a lot of teams at the top that are going to be playoff contenders next year, they're not really looking for goaltenders. There's not a lot of top contending teams that need one right now. I think maybe outside of Philadelphia, who could use a veteran guy to, take over for Hart if for some reason next year he doesn't really, have as much success. But other than that, there's not, maybe Carolina, and those are really the only other teams that I see where they're like, okay, we could use a starting goaltender and we have the money to pay. So.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, well, let's we'll get off the Columbus schneid here. I think that it's definitely the most interesting situation in the league, and as we have 22 days until deadline. Is it the 24th, 25th, something like that?
Yeah, 25th.
And so 23 days. So as these next 3 weeks unfold, it'll be interesting to see, because this could really change the landscape of not just the conference but the league. If he gets sent to the west side, I know everything's been Eastern Conference in terms of the teams that he would go to, but is it out of the realm of possibility that a team that is maybe doesn't think they could sign him, but maybe they can bring him in and he's really the piece that puts them over the top? I don't know. Let's go Colton Parayko from the St. Louis Blues, who have struggled like crazy, but they're
still in the thick of it.
They are still in the thick of it, only 3 points out and a game in hand on Colorado. So it's definitely not over for them, although they have 3 other teams to jump. Specifically, let's just tip our caps to the Arizona Coyotes, who are 6-2-2 in their last 10 and have been playing very well, have gotten themselves back to 500 and are only 2 points out of a playoff spot. So we thought they were dead in the water once again, and they're having a nice second half of the season. So out of all these teams out of the playoffs right now, Arizona is the team that I think you picked them to make the. Did you pick them to make the playoffs?
I did pick them, to be a bubble team at the beginning of the year.
So I think that everything seems to be coming together for them.
Finally,
their younger players are finding their stride, and I think that the move to trade Dylan Strome, for whatever reason, had some pressure taken off of other guys around in the organization. And so I just think overall you're seeing some good play out of them, and it's without Antti Ranta.
Right.
So it's not what we expected. Okay, so let's go Colton Parayko. Where do you expect him to end up? Now that the Leafs have acquired Jake Muzzin, I don't think that the Leafs are a candidate. Although I think the Leafs would have liked to have Parayko because he's a right-handed shot.
Right. Yeah.
But let's give your predictions as to where he ends up, and that could be St. Louis too. Maybe
it is St. Louis.
It is. Okay.
It is. Yeah. I think he's got 3 years left after this season at $5.5 million. So if you're a team that's in playoff contention that could really use a top 4, top 2 guy, you're thinking, okay, well, we got to have the cap space to keep him, for the next few years. And, there's really the only team I could see right now in playoff contention that could really use a guy for the next few years might be Dallas, right? Maybe Vegas. You could throw their name in there too. But I think both those teams are okay where they are defensively. Dallas, of course, they're in the bottom I mean, they're one of the better teams in the league in terms of goals against for some reason. I mean, last year was complete opposite, but this year they flipped the script, and same goes with the Islanders. But
they actually are second in the league in goals against behind the Islanders. So
yeah. So I don't think Dallas is really. I think if anything, Dallas wants to bring in scoring depth because they need it badly more than any other playoff team right now. I honestly think he stays put just for the fact that he's got a couple years left on his deal after this. And I think, honestly, St. Louis, with them making a push right now for the playoffs, why would you want to get rid of, a guy like that right now at this point if you legitimately think you're going to get in? Because let's face it, I think a lot of it depends on the play of Jake Allen. Binghamton's been awesome as a backup, but how long is that success going to sustain itself? Because at some point, if you do make the playoffs, you have to rely on Jake Allen. I don't think they go to Binghamton in the playoffs. So
I think they will.
You think they will?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you're going to ride the guy who's hot, right? And who's actually played well. And Jake Allen, this isn't like it's a slump. This is Jake Allen.
Oh, for sure.
For whatever reason, he, what he showed when Brian Elliott was there, after Brian Elliott left, he has just not been the same. And maybe it has something to do with some of the changes that the league has made, the smaller equipment and the shorter behind the net. And he's just not reading things the same way. I'm not sure. But, it seems like this is the Jake Allen that you're going to get. He's a backup goaltender.
Yeah, legit.
That's just how it is. If there's a team out there that is in a position to trade for a Parayko and could really, I think, put their organization in a great spot, I'm looking at the Buffalo Sabres. This isn't based on any actual rumor that I've been hearing or anything, but the Buffalo Sabres, right now they're 3 points out of the playoffs. Okay, I mean, making the playoffs this year, of course, is always the goal, but I don't think it was the expectation for the Buffalo Sabres. It was that they would contend for a playoff spot, and they were, top 3 in the division. They were actually, I believe, leading the division at one point, or not leading, but they were second in the division. They jumped Toronto for a hot second, and now they've kind of fallen back down to earth. They're 3-7 in their last 10, lost 7-3 to the Chicago Blackhawks, and I think that's a telling score when you consider that a team that struggled to score is lighting you up. To me, the Buffalo Sabres' weakness is their back end. Despite Rasmus Dahlin, really like what Rasmus Dahlin's been able to do, and obviously is going to continue to grow. A defenseman, you're not expecting him to come in and win the Norris in the first year or the second, like a Connor McDavid comes in and wins the Art Ross's second year. But I think that within 3 or 4 years, he'll be in that position. But you could maybe bring in somebody who can help to really calm that back end. And outside of Dahlin, outside of Ristolainen, there's not a whole lot back there. Zach Bogosian's fine, but I think it's preferable that he sits on the bottom pairing. And so I think that Colton Parayko would be a great fit there, and St. Louis needs some infusion of forward depth and some younger forwards. They have I know Buffalo, and another thing is that Buffalo and St. Louis just made a trade in the offseason. So they have a relationship, and I think that trade's worked out well for both teams. Outside of the whole
Berglund thing,
Berglund disaster, but I think that Berglund wasn't really obviously the main piece of that deal. But I think Buffalo would be in a much better position with a Parayko, and they could give up. I mean, you're not going to give up Middlestad or anything like that.
Maybe send Connor Sherry back the other way.
I see. Yeah, you could do that. I don't know if Connor Sherry is a player that St. Louis is looking at and drooling over.
No.
I think it does need to be somebody who you value as an organization. But I also think that you're not going to give a Middlestat. You're not going to, maybe a Sam Reinhart.
Maybe Alexander Nylander.
Although Sam Reinhart has looked much, much better. But
yeah, I don't think he's going anywhere. But Alexander Nylander, maybe?
Yeah, and Alex Nylander is interesting because, that would be, of course, St. Louis would be taking a chance on him because he hasn't made the NHL. And so that, I don't know if that would be enough to get the job done. But Yeah, I mean, they do have some interesting options, whereas some other teams may not be as willing to deal some of their younger guys, because Buffalo does have quite a few young players, and so it does give them the option to maybe package some of those for a defenseman, which would put them in a better spot. And we've talked about Colton Parayko for like 8 minutes now, so
has it really been?
I don't know. So let's go to Andre Burakovsky.
Yeah,
which it's interesting that his name is up there now, because the Capitals have been doing so well, and yet he is on the trade block because I don't think that he's not getting the kind of ice time that he wants, and also they got to move out guys as they have to pay guys. So where do you think an Andre Burakovsky goes? But also, what do you think that the Capitals are looking for in return?
I think the Capitals honestly would prefer to get a roster player, somebody they can inject right away. And when I say a roster player, I think they want somebody that can play third line minutes for them, because like we talked about, Burakovsky, he's better suited. I think he wants to be in a top six role, right? Whether or not he's ready for that or he has the talent to do that, I'm still a little unclear about, because again, what I've seen of him in Washington shows maybe he has spurts where you're like, oh man, this guy's got such good talent. He could definitely be a top six, but then he has moments where you're like, okay, this guy should not be playing top six anywhere. But
yeah, he's got 12 points in 45 games.
Yeah, so little flashes, but so for me, I think, one of the reasons Washington was so successful last year is they were getting, especially in the playoffs, was they were getting a lot of scoring depth out of their bottom six. You had Brett Connolly, Devontae Smith-Pelly, these guys, Lars Eller, that really stepped up when the top six wasn't getting it going, and I think that's what they're definitely looking for if they're trying to move Andre Burakovsky. Now, you're going to have to find a team that, again, could use him in terms of, maybe, down the road we might be able to turn him into a top six forward. We still believe he has that ability, that talent. So what kind of team is that? Who would that be? I honestly think that maybe you could swing a deal with a team like the New York Rangers, for example, right? A team looking to, revamp their lineup. They have some pieces that are maybe, they're looking to move at the deadline, because let's face it, I don't think they're getting in at this point. So maybe a guy like Kevin Hayes, right? A guy who could really go in there and inject a lot of scoring ability into their third line. I mean, obviously you're going to have to send something more back to New York, but that's a good starting point for me.
So, yeah, I mean, to me, I don't think he gets dealt.
No?
I'm going to say that, because he's making $3 million.
I mean,
do you think he's worth $3 million?
No, but as an RFA, right?
So I guess as an RFA, you have to, you're gonna, in order to, you have to give him a match
offer sheet, yeah.
Offer sheet,
right?
Well, I'm not talking about other teams. I'm talking about the Capitals. Like, there's that the certain amount that you can just you put your stamp on the guy and you say, yeah, I mean, we're gonna, what's that called? Why am I blanking on that? With an RFA, you can, in order to, because a team could go, no, we actually don't want you. We're just going to let you walk into restricted free agency.
Right.
And you have to go in and you have to say, no, we're putting an offer on you, for the team that he belongs to, which I think is a 10% raise.
Something like that, yeah. Now,
to me, do you go to him and say, look, like, obviously, you haven't earned the $3 million a year that you were making. That's not happening anymore. So, what if you could get Andre Burakovsky for $2 million for the next 3 years? Would you keep him?
Yeah, I think so.
Opposed to bringing
even at 2.5, I might still keep him.
Yeah. So maybe he's just unwilling to sign.
Right, and that's the thing. Maybe he doesn't want to stay there because he knows he's not going to really get top 6 minutes.
Yeah. Whereas if they do a lot, like, say, yeah, I mean, you have to offer him a 10% raise for the 1 year, and he could just accept that, and then you're paying him more. So yeah, I guess it does make sense to move him out. I see him moving maybe to a team with that. Yeah, you're right. It isn't in the playoffs. Is looking for that opportunity. Probably a bottom of the league, like maybe an Ottawa Senators kind of team where they could use some players who need a second chance. Like that is the advantage of being in the bottom of the league, is that you can offer those second chance type contracts. Like, hey, come in, 1 year deal, let's prove it to us. and see what you can do. And maybe he gets an opportunity in an Ottawa or LA or something like that.
New Jersey, who's made a deal before for a guy from Washington, for sure.
That's true.
I get
Joe
that.
Hansen. Let's shift gears and go to the Ottawa Senators. Mark Stone, there's Ryan Dzingel and Matt Duchene. All their names have been tossed around. Of course, we know that Mark Stone, a UFA at the end of the year, as well as Duchene, and then Ryan Dzingel, also a UFA at the end of the year. A little bit different of a UFA than the other two. Obviously, much higher profile in Stone and Duchene, but it seems as though the Senators will look to deal anyone that they can and acquire some assets, since they don't have their first round draft pick. That belongs to the Colorado Avalanche.
Oh boy.
So the Colorado Avalanche are poised to have the first overall pick.
Still scares me to think, bless you, scares me to think McKinnon and then Jack Hughes right behind him. Like, that's just so terrifying.
Yeah.
But that's what that franchise needs too right now.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of franchises that need just one of those guys. So okay, so what do you think happens in Ottawa?
Boy, you know what? This is real tough because you hear so often, at least I've heard, Duchene and Stone's names put together, right? Like, Duchene really doesn't want to sign there unless he knows Stone's going to be hanging around. And, you know, I think probably Stone is probably feeling the same way, right? Why do I want to hang around if you're not going to have a number one elite center for me to play with, right?
Sure.
And I don't know if you'd call Duchene elite, but he's certainly playing like it right now. Boy.
Maybe that, like, where you've got superstar and then you have elite. You know, I'd put Duchene into an elite when there's superstar.
That's fair.
He's that next tier of center.
That's fair. Yeah. And I honestly think the only person out of these three that I could see hanging around might be Ryan Dzingel. The other two guys I still think are poised to take off because, I mean, let's face it, we haven't had this type of superstar power hitting free agency at this kind of amount in quite a while.
Yeah.
Duchene, to me, I think if you're moving him, I think a perfect landing spot would be the Winnipeg Jets. They have their first round, second round picks for the next 3 years. So they have the ability to move those. And I think right now, where they're at would be a perfect situation for them to just go all in on a guy like Duchene to put next to Laine on that second line. And then you don't have to use Brian Little as much on that second line if you don't want to. And then what I would try to do if I'm Winnipeg, I try to send Matthew Perreault back the other way to clear a little bit of cap space that way too. But a guy who could really, I mean, he does have a modified no trade clause. I think submits a list of 5 teams he can't be traded to. So that might hamper that.
Could, yeah.
But again, I think, you know, I think if you can get him to be okay with that, I think that would be perfect for Winnipeg. Or maybe they hang on to Perreault and just try to swing some picks and prospects to get Duchene back the other way.
Okay. What if you were to trade Jacob Trouba, and what package would you need to do to go, we want Duchene and Stone?
Duchene and Stone. That would be disgusting.
And I mean, that's an extra $13.5 million onto the Jets' salary cap right now. They have $5 million, or they have $16 million in current space, so they could do it. They could bring both guys in. So you'd have to trade Jacob Trouba, who is an RFA at the end of the year. So there's that. I mean, that's if you would only do this if you were able to get guys onto an extension or something. You know, you're not just gonna or maybe you because Ottawa wouldn't. So if you traded Jacob Trouba for Mark Stone and Matt Duchene and included a first round pick, and is there like a prospect that they could possibly be interested in, and then suddenly you're taking a little hit on your defensive side, but suddenly you're trading for basically a whole line.
That would be real tough to swing. And I think if you do that, you definitely have to get a Brian Little or Matthew Perreault going back the other way, even though, again, both of them have no, modified trade clauses, because you won't have the cap space next season to get those guys re-signed. So
and you got to sign Laine and Connor, but
and oh my gosh, Kyle Connor looks even better than Laine right now, which is just disgusting. So we'll see how that one plays out after this season with re-signing. But I don't know. to me, I think Duchesne is likely for Winnipeg. Stone, on the other hand, I don't see as much. Now, a terrifying team that I could see Matt Stone go to because they desperately need a winger that can play top 6 minutes would be Boston. And Toronto would hate that.
Yeah,
on
that
so
would
many
be
levels.
rough.
Because I mean, honestly, you look at Krejci, right? If you put a quality top 6 winger with him, he can thrive and plays pretty well. And I mean, he showed that when Bergeron was out for a period of time that he can still handle playing with superstars. And so if you can get him someone like that, that would be fantastic for Boston for sure.
All right, or maybe Ottawa trades Mark Stone for Phil Kessel, the Senators.
Wow.
Let's go Carolina Hurricanes, Michael Furland. Not super complicated. Not so much, what they're going to get for him. I don't think that he's not going to fetch more than a third round
maybe a
pick,
second.
maybe a second round pick. For a team that needs to bring in, that third line winger who can kill some penalties. Who's that team that's going to be willing to give up a mid-grade pick?
Yeah, and remember too, this is a guy right now, 25 points, 42 games. He's going to be a UFA after the season, so it's not an RFA situation where he's gonna where he doesn't want to be in Carolina because I've heard right now that they're having disagreements on contract amounts. So I think any team that takes him has to realize we're probably going to lose him after this season. To me, the number one team, I think that would be a great fit for him because they just lost somebody, unfortunately, for the rest of the season due to a substance abuse issue would be the Nashville Predators. I think after losing Austin Watson, he would be a great fit in terms of being a bigger guy who can throw the body around and still put up points and would be good on that third line for them.
All right, I like that. Justin Williams is also an unrestricted free agent.
He doesn't go anywhere.
You don't think that he's going anywhere?
I don't. I think he'll actually re-sign a 1-year deal after this season because I heard an interview with Rod Brendamore 2 days ago, and he adores. I mean, they have a relationship when they won the Cup in Carolina.
Yeah.
So they've already got that relationship there, and he thinks the world of Justin Williams in terms of a leader in that locker room. Now, Williams is still putting up some decent points. Granted, he's not a top 6 guy anymore.
Yeah, but as Justin Williams, do you think that if they said, look, like, hey, we're not making the playoffs. I guess they aren't out. They're only 3 points out of it. So I suppose right now, and they're 6-3-1 in their last 10. So right now you're not going to deal either of these guys. But let's say 3 weeks from now, they've now gone 500 and they're 5 points out of the playoffs. Do you go to Justin Williams and go, look, there's always a place here for you, but do you want to go to a winning team? Because his no trade is submit a 15 list of teams you don't want to go to. I
mean, you can have that conversation with them, just like I think Detroit's going to have that conversation with Jimmy Howard. But honestly, I don't think he's going anywhere. Yeah.
Okay. Let's now that we're talking Jimmy Howard, let's just talk Jimmy Howard.
Let's talk it.
Do you think Jimmy Howard's going to go somewhere? Because the asking price right now, Ken Holland says, is a first round pick for
Still
Jimmy
wants
Howard.
that first. Yeah,
I wouldn't do it. I don't think there's a team in the league that'll give a first round pick for Jimmy Howard.
No, and I think eventually that price comes down a little bit. The one team I think that might be willing to give up a second round pick, might be just the Vegas Golden Knights. Honestly, they could desperately use a backup goaltender because down the stretch, I think they want to make sure Fleury gets some rest. But I think maybe as just a courtesy to Howard, you say, hey, we're going to move you just because we want to give you a shot to win another cup. But
did he win a cup? He hasn't won a cup.
No, he hasn't. No. Did I say another cup?
You said another.
I
cup.
did. Okay. No.
Was he there in 2008?
No. I think he was still in the minors at that time with Grand Rapids. So, but yeah, I don't really see any other team that might be willing to give up something for a goaltender right now, other than Vegas and maybe St. Louis if they if they're in at this point. But again. Because like we talked about, trusting Jake Allen is just tough.
I mean, Philadelphia's won 6 in a row. Carter Hart. But
no, I think
maybe they look to bring in somebody if they're.
No, I don't think so. I think they're content with getting in or out at this point. They're not trying to push
still anything. 9 points out of the playoffs.
Yeah, I think if they get in, that's great. If they don't, they're totally fine with that at this point. I think because of the change in management, they've accepted it.
Yeah. Do you think Nicholas Kronwall gets dealt? He can submit a 10-team list of teams he can be traded to.
That'd be a great addition for somebody, and I think I think he's another guy where you just go to and say, hey, do you want to go? Do you want to go somewhere and try to win another cup?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he actually has won a cup. So I got that one right.
He has won a cup, yes.
Yeah, I think he's another guy where you just say, hey, do you want to go? Yes, no. If he says yes, then I think you could move him because there's a lot of teams right now that would love to have him on the bottom pair.
If you are Ken Holland and you say, Nick, I need you to submit a 10-team list to me, and he says, I don't want to go, I'd say, I honestly, you've been great for this organization, but I have to deal you because Ken Holland's his Achilles heel is his loyalty. It's why he signed Justin Abdelkader to an absurd contract. It's why Darren Helm exactly is still for another 2 years paid $3.85 million and will never score 15 goals again. I mean, it's why you have Danny DeKeyser signed for another 3 years after this year. There's just too many. Jonathan Eriksson is still signed for another year after this year.
Stop. Don't mention that guy's name to me again.
And he may be the worst defenseman in the National Hockey League.
He might be.
So, I mean, there's just been some absurd loyalty. And then the funny thing is, and then you have a good player like Andreas Athanasiou. And remember, there was all the drama. He was a holdout for a minute because they wouldn't give him like $2.5 million.
Yeah, it was like a difference of $700,000.
It was ridiculous when the guy was like fifth in the league in 5-on-5 goals or something like just crazy. So it's the loyalty factor that has killed this team in a lot of ways and has set them up for cap hell. And so can you, as Ken Holland, go, I need to be a man here and run a business for a moment and go, Nicholas Kronwall has been great for our organization, but we need to deal him because we could get a second-round pick. That second-round pick could turn into, I mean, think about Alex DeBrincat was a second-round pick. There's lots of players who go later than the second round that end up being very impactful players in that franchise. I don't know why I just randomly thought of Alex DeBrincat, but
that's impressive though.
Travis Dermott was the second round pick.
There you go.
I mean, there's these players that are having impacts on their team, and they're players that the Red Wings need right now. And so, if Nicholas Kronwall wants to come back, you say, hey, there's always a spot here for you. Just like Justin Williams, there's always a spot here for you, but we need to get some assets for you because we aren't in a position to where we can hang on to you. It's not worth it to anybody. Go on a run, go have fun, go make the playoffs one last time. Because chances are, let's say he comes back and he signs a 1-year deal in Detroit, which I don't see happening. I think he'll retire after this year.
Yeah, probably.
But let's say he came back and said, I'd like to play one more year in Detroit. Yeah, okay, 1 year at $2 million, $2.5 million, fine. But I think you deal him. You've got to deal Nyquist. You've got to, if Vanek is willing to go anywhere, you deal Vanek. What do you think of Nyquist?
Yeah, he's an interesting case because I think he could probably, out of anybody the Wings have right now, he could get you your best return. I think he's almost. I mean, he's pretty dang close to a point per game pace right now. Granted, it's mostly all assists, but still, it's pretty impressive. And you put him with, another winger or a center who can score some goals, and you got yourself a pretty dang good playmaker. And again, back to Ken Holland, I think he's looking over his shoulder right now, so he needs to deal some of these guys because Steve Yzerman's, everybody's thinking he's coming in. So, Kenny Holland's like, I got to prove that I'm still the capable GM that, I once was.
I'll tell you exactly what the Red Wings need to do.
Please.
With Gustav Nyquist. It is to call his former assistant general manager,
Mr. Neal,
Jim Nill, in Dallas, and I think that there may be even a way to where not only do they trade Nyquist, they also trade Jimmy Howard at the same time. Now they have Ben Bishop, Anton.
He's not going to Dallas, but
it was a dream in my head for a moment because in my head I was thinking that. It was their backup goalie last year.
Oh, gosh.
Terrible backup goalie last year. I forgot that they had Anton Khudobin. Okay, but anyways, Nyquist would be a nice fit. He is an unrestricted free agent, so you don't have any commitment beyond this year. But they're, I think that this is a team that needs to do something in the playoffs, not just make the playoffs. They need to do something in the playoffs. And so, there's plenty of guys that you could deal for a Nyquist. You can also just trade. I wouldn't trade a first round pick for Nyquist, but I think a second round pick would be fair. A second round pick and a prospect.
Second and a third, I think, coming back would be cool.
A second and a fourth.
And honestly, with Dallas, I think because, like you said, they've got Spezza's money coming off the books. And granted, Tyler Seguin's getting a little bit of a bump. I think like $4 million ish of a bump, but I think long term, even Nyquist could be a good fit for them over the next 3-4 years. So, maybe you make one of those, that second round pick a conditional, says, hey, if he resigns, it's a first.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah.
I think one player that I've always been pretty high on is Adam Masserin, who was the Florida Panthers prospect, and then the Dallas Stars drafted him last year and signed him. He's doing very well in the AHL. He's got 29 points in 44 games, so he's playing at a good clip in the AHL. I think that you bring him over. He's a guy who maybe could eventually play in your top 9 as a scoring winger. And then, if you can get a third or a second round pick, so be it. So I think there's some good options there. And the fact that Holland and Nil have a good relationship, that's always just a bonus. Let's talk Wayne Simmons.
Wayne Simmons
is probably the last really big player on this list of potential free agents. Where do you think he ends up?
Boy, this is another guy, too, I could see fitting in Boston quite well. He plays that rough style that people in Boston love. And again, he still has top 6 potential right now at this age. Now, granted, maybe, in a couple of years, I think the way he plays the game, he's going to start slowing down. But I think right now, he's still suitable in a top 6 role, and Boston, like I said, could really use one. And I think right now, too, Philadelphia, with Simmons, I don't think the asking price would be that high. I think you could get away with a third and a prospect, a second round pick maybe for a guy like him.
You think so?
I do. I think he and
third
Nyquist,
round pick for
he and Nyquist right now, I think, to me, are right along the same level in terms of asking prices.
Yeah, right now Wayne Simmons, 15 goals, 8 assists. Obviously not putting up a lot of assists, but 15 goals is solid for this point in the season. He probably will end up with 25, which 25 to 30 goals is no slouch.
No,
in this league. I think Nyquist just scored his 12th goal last night.
Yeah, he's not a goal scorer. Let's be honest.
So, yeah, right. I think you're probably right. The difference to me is that Wayne Simmons makes more of an impact because of the way he plays the game. Like, he's more noticeable.
Sure.
I think that Nyquist is a nice secondary player. You need Simmons to be paired with another good player for him to be effective. I don't think he's a guy that's going to drive a line by any means. But I do think that Simmons could maybe fetch that first round pick, assuming that it's a team, they're going to talk to him and go, would you have truly interest in signing here beyond this year? And I think, again, it's a good point with the conditional picks. I don't think anyone should trade a first round pick for a player who's just going to leave at the end of the year. But it is an opportunity to bring that player in and show them what it's like to be a member of said team. So I don't think that it's unfair to go, well, yeah, we want a second round pick, or a third round pick, and that becomes a second, or the second becomes a first, or whatever it is, if he resigns, because essentially you've given that team the advantage to sign him, right? So I think that really teams should just go to that all the time. Anytime it's a rental, you should never give up a first round pick. Just make it a conditional based on whether he resigns with you. There aren't too many rentals that work out where you give up a first round pick and you end up winning the cup.
Yeah, that's true.
There are very few that I can think of where it actually worked out. I think you'd say, I know the Penguins, when they acquired Marian Hossa from the Atlanta Thrashers in 2008 at the deadline, they gave up a first round pick. And they ended up going to the Stanley Cup Finals. Of course, they lost. And then Hossa goes to the Red Wings, and then
They lose.
he loses again. But no worries, he ends up winning 3 Stanley Cups with Chicago, so it ended up being fine. I think he went to 3 Stanley Cup finals in a row with 3 different teams. I think he was the first player ever to do that. But yeah, I think that it's unwise to give up a first round pick. It's almost unwise to give up a second round pick because of how valuable those second round picks are. But we also have to consider the Leafs gave up a first round pick for Jake Muzzin. However, Muzzin has an extra year left on his deal, but that is still a high price to pay for one player win that first round pick. I mean, we've seen late first round picks turn into franchise style players. I mean, Claude Giroux was I think 24th overall pick. So there's some pretty darn good players late in the draft that slipped through. But anything left on Wayne Simmons? Do you want to?
No, I'm over it.
Edmonton Oilers. Cam Talbot, Jesse Puljujarvi, Kyler Yamamoto. All these names have been thrown out there as players who may move to bring in some infusion. Do you think Talbot is gone? I know there's been talks about re-signing him
yeah.
too.
I heard that. I
kind of having a 1-2 punch with the backup goaltender there. So
yeah, I'm okay if you want to re-sign him, but I think you can't give him more than like $2 million.
Yeah, I think maybe a Jonathan Bernier type of deal, a 3 for 3.
Sure.
Yeah,
that could work out because I mean he's shown he can be productive and he has flashes. I think it's not completely his fault that his numbers have really dipped, but it is I think 50-50 honestly, the team in front of him and him. But yeah, I think if you're Edmonton, right, unfortunately you're still in the thick of things because no team in the West apparently wants to grab a hold of a playoff spot and run with it. For some reason, Anaheim decided to lose 1,800 games in a row, but still managed to grasp hold of a playoff spot. I don't know how they're still a bubble team, but yeah, I think if you're Edmonton, you try to make some deals. You try to get maybe some prospects back if you can, or some picks, so that maybe in the next year or two you can find a guy who can play with Connor McDavid.
Here's my thing. You traded Taylor Hall because, well, yeah, I know this is a previous regime now that
right.
Now that we've brought in some more, hopefully more competent.
Yeah, they need to go out and get Mr. Hextall to run this franchise.
To me, yeah, that's a great point. To me, you've given up on too many players. Don't give up on Jesse Puljujarvi.
Okay.
Don't give up on Kyler Yamamoto. Don't bring in veterans. Don't do any of those stupid things, because that's how you destroy your franchise. And you look back 8 years from then and you go, oh, well, if we just kept Taylor Hall, maybe we'd probably be a pretty damn good team. And that's, they've just made mistake after mistake. And it's been over the last 15 years, they've made mistake after mistake and rushed players and given up on players. And it's time to just let that go. Other teams don't just go and trade the players that they took 3rd overall or 4th overall. You hang on to that guy. I look at Buffalo with Sam Reinhart. I think of Calgary with Sam Bennett. Same draft year. That both those guys were players that a lot of people were saying, trade this guy. I mean, he's just not he's not working out. Like, we expected so much of him. He was taken 3rd overall. He's taken 2nd overall, and he's garbage. And, Sam Bennett, should he have been taken 3rd overall? No. But the Flames go, we need to hang on to this guy because he's still a good piece. And Sam Bennett has really developed into a nice 3rd-line center for that team. And you need high-end talent on your 3rd line. I mean, you think of the top teams across the league and you go, all right, yeah, I mean, you definitely, you need center depth. You can't just have 1 or 2 good centers. You need 3. With in terms of Reinhart, I mean, that guy now he's playing, he's got what, 40 points in 50 games kind of thing. Like, he's right there. And so I think that it's a mistake to give up on these young players. You drafted them for a reason. Now, maybe hit the reset button in some development for him, but don't just give up on him.
Yeah, I like that. The more and more you talk about it, the more and more I completely agree with it, because, again, a lot of people forget that these kids, Puljujarvi and Yamamoto, they're only 20 years old. So they still got plenty of years left to develop, right?
20 freaking years old.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, people are already pulling the plug on him already in Edmonton. I get it, right? You have the best player in the world, if not the second best player, depending on how you feel about Crosby versus McDavid. But, like, you're ready to win now just because you have this one guy, right? And it's Pittsburgh, when they got Sidney Crosby, they were still patient, right? They still had to go out and draft other guys and bring in other talent.
They were in the Stanley Cup Finals 4 years later.
Right. Well, I mean,
he was
that's
drafted in 2005 and 2008. They were in the finals.
Right. Well, I mean,
but
you did get Fleury, Malkin, right? You draft these elite guys with them. But again, I think because McDavid is so good, right? You expect results now, and I think that's why they maybe rushed to sign a guy like Milan Lucic and traded away a guy like Taylor Hall, because they were like, we need to hit the reset button, we need to win now, kind of thing, and it just didn't pan out.
They didn't sign Lucic and kept Hall. That would have been great.
Yeah, it really would have, wouldn't it? I'm with you there. If they hang on to these pieces, be patient. You know, who knows? Maybe they bring back Eberle, because next year they have, I think, roughly $8 million in cap space to work with. And granted, you do have a couple, guys you have to sign. Maybe you deal a guy like Alex Chase on, or maybe you find a way to move out, Kevin Gravel or something to a team that needs a depth defenseman. But for the most part, I'm with you. Hang on to these guys.
All right. Well, let's. We're gonna let that be the trade deadline show part one.
Part one,
because we have a lot more names to talk about.
There are,
and we have a lot more shows to do. So we'll continue with. We'll go Justin Falk and Matt Zuccarello, a Jakob Silverberg, Phil Kessel, even on the chopping block potentially. Of course, Kevin Hayes, and we'll let you know where we think all these guys are going to go and more. Let us know what you thought. You can hit us up at OT Hockey Talk on Twitter. And Justin, any parting words before we take off into the rest of our Saturday?
Heal up.
Who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl?
Oh, I'm a Patriots fan. Anybody knows me. I'm a big U of M guy, football. So Tom Brady. And a funny little story. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I think this might be something that our couple listeners might enjoy, right? Growing up, I had a friend of mine that was the biggest Drew Bledsoe fan, right? Hated Drew Bledsoe because of it. And me being a huge Michigan fan, when I found out that Tom Brady was going to take over for an injured Drew Bledsoe, I was like, man, I hope this guy pans out well. I'm going to be the biggest Tom Brady fan if he does, because I never want to see Drew Bledsoe's face again, just because I got sick of hearing my friend talk about him. And what do you know? Worked out quite well. So I have loved Tom Brady ever since for those reasons alone.
All right. Interesting you didn't love him when he was on U of M.
No, even though he was, you know what? I honestly didn't really have an opinion, because unfortunately, what's-his-face Lloyd Carr kept starting him, and then
Drew
he would
Henson was there at the same time.
Yeah, he would start him, and then he'd be like, oh, well, he's not our starter, and then start Henson. And it just, I'd never got enough of him to really form an opinion, I guess.
It is crazy that maybe the greatest quarterback of all time barely played in college.
Right.
Was not a good college quarterback.
Yeah, but I mean, it works out that way too, where guys are fantastic college guys and just can't grasp the pro level. So
yep. It's just no exact science.
Right.
So, all right. Well, with that, we hope you guys have a great weekend. We'll talk to you guys earlier in the week.